Alright, so I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I have to re-record this video because the video I did yesterday, I lost a whole hour of it. So I'm going to re-record this video, which is probably a good thing because the audio will be a little better. There's no interruptions and stuff like that. And yeah, hopefully the flow goes a little better. So I'm going to actually use Monday's project. Monday and Tuesday are the same project, or Monday and Thursday are the same project anyways. Yeah, Monday. So it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to use Monday's project and open it up and do the same steps that I did last night, but with Monday. And hopefully everything goes well, and we get a decent video out of this. So the first piece that I'm going to talk about is Heroku. That's the step that we didn't get to do last week. I wanted to actually deploy to Heroku, but of course that requires you signing up to Heroku. So what I'm going to get you to do, if you open up your internet browser, so I'm just going to create a new window here, go to Heroku.com, and I'll show you what it looks like when you're not logged in. You're going to go to sign up. You're going to fill in all this information and click You're Not a Robot and click Create a Free Account. Once you're done that process, you're going to log in. Go. And you're going to create a new application. So you come over here to where it says New, Create New App. Call it whatever you want to call it. I'm going to call mine Comp 2068 SC McKinnon Monday. That way it's Monday's app. I'm going to click Create App. So when you first create an app, it actually takes you to this page. You have a bunch of different options here. The options we're going to work with are the deployment options, but before we do that, we actually need to pair it up to our GitHub account. So what we'll do is we'll click on the GitHub option. When you do that, it says connect to GitHub. The first time you do this, scroll down a little bit. You're going to have to click some of the links and pair up your GitHub account. If you have any difficulties with that, please let me know and we can address that on the next time that I'm in. However, you shouldn't. It's pretty straightforward. I just can't remember exactly how it looks because it's already done it. Once you're done that, though, and you have your account here, you actually need to connect the repo name. Now, when you click on this, it doesn't give you a list of the repositories. So what I do is just leave it blank, click search. Takes a second, then it will list all of the repositories that are available. So you're going to find your Comp 2068 blog Thursday if you're in Thursday's class, or Monday if you're in Monday's class, or whatever you happen to call that project. You're going to click connect. It's going to ask you to choose the branch. We're going to choose master so that we basically we're going to treat master as a production branch so that every time we deploy to master, it's going to get picked up by Heroku and immediately added to our Heroku box. So I'm going to choose enable automatic deploys so that that happens anytime we actually choose to deploy to master. And then we're going to deploy the initial branch just to start this whole process. Now, we don't have anything on master, or you shouldn't have anything on master. The only thing sitting in master right now should be the README file. Let's just verify that. We can actually jump over to GitHub real fast. We can go to our Comp 2068. Whoops, that's not 2068. 2068. And I'm going to choose the Monday one because that's the one I'm on. And sure enough, I only have a README file in there. We do have multiple branches. We have the Part 1 branch as well, which will contain our files. But now, nothing is actually online right now, so it doesn't matter. But we want to connect to the master branch. So I'm going to click Deploy Branch. And it's going to go through and attempt to build it, but it's going to fail. And the reason why it's going to fail is because the way Heroku works is it detects the technology that you're using to create your application. So if you're using PHP, it would detect that. If you're using Ruby, it would detect that, so on and so forth. So we wanted to detect our Node application, but currently we don't have any Node files up, so it has no idea what we're attempting to do. So instead, we're going to need to actually go ahead and take the application we built last week and then push it up. So the first step I'm going to do, I'm going to open up my terminal, or command prompt, or whatever you happen to be in. And I'm going to navigate to that directory. So I can't entirely remember where it is, so I'm going to do cd space. I'm going to open up my Finder. And I'm going to go find it. Now, I think I actually dumped it in here under the Comp 2068 folder. And it's not in there. Maybe it's under Projects? Monday? Oh, there it is. So I'm going to, whoops, that's not what I want to do. I want to take it and drag it and drop it in here and then hit enter. Alright, so now I'm in the folder, and you'll notice the branch I'm on is part 1. Now, if you want to know what branch you're on, you can type in git status, and it will tell you the branch right here. You're on branch part 1. It will also tell you what files are not currently pushed but have changes. Now, notice we have this wonderful node modules folder in here. We don't actually need to push that up. What usually the way the workflow works is you only push up your application files, you don't push your node modules, and then when somebody pulls this branch down, they run npm install, which will read the package.json file and install the files for you. So we're going to remove that right now. So the easiest way to do that is inside your Finder, just go into your project, click on the node modules, and trash can it. Okay. Now we're almost done, but we actually need to open our project up inside our IDE. So if you go to Visual Studio Code, go to File, Open. I'm going to navigate to that project folder. Oops, why do I keep always going to the wrong spot? Project Monday. There we go. I'm going to open that in place. And the best part about this, I can actually zoom out a little bit because you can just zoom in on your own page. So in here, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it .gitignore. And in that file, I'm going to add a new line called node modules, and I'm going to save that. What this basically does is it stops Git from pushing our node modules folder. So even when we do our npm install the next time and we have the node modules in here, this will prevent the node modules from being written to our repository, which is what we want. So now I'm going to jump back over to my terminal. Just going to clear my screen. I'm going to do git status again. You'll notice that the node modules folder isn't in here anymore. And I'm going to go ahead and add these things in. Now I'm going to add app separate from gitignore. So the way I do that is I do git add app.js. And if I do a git status, you'll see that it's currently waiting. It's been staged, and now it's waiting to go up. So now I'm going to add the, I'm going to commit it. So git commit -m and a set of quotes. -m stands for message. It's a flag. And I'm going to type my message in here. Our initial simple application. There we go. Now I'm ready to add the remaining files. If I do git status, you'll see I still have 3 files that are unstaged. So what I will do is stage all 3 of them at once, and I can do that by just doing git add dot. And dot's basically a wildcard. It will just stage anything that isn't currently staged. I'll hit enter. If I do git status, you can now see that all 3 of these files are staged. And then I'll commit them. Package files. I'm going to do a git status just to see where we're at. It says I'm currently ahead of the actual part 1 branch. So there's 2 steps that we always do. The first step we do is we always do a pull. The reason why we do that is because if we're working with somebody else, they may have pushed code to the branch, and we may not have that code. So we want to make sure that we have their code and that we haven't created any conflicts or anything like that. So I'm going to do a git pull. And when I do the git pull, you'll see that there's no changes, so I get an already up to date. Now that I've done my git pull, I'm ready to actually push my changes. So I'm going to do git push. And I'm going to get a permission denied error. The reason why I'm getting that is because I also use Mintent, and that's currently sitting on this machine. So what happens is every so often these branches associate themselves to a different identity. So I just got to quickly change the identity. So I'll do that now. I'm just going to pause while I do that. So now that I've done that, I'm ready to actually do my push. So I'm going to do git push. It's going to compress our files. It's going to add them to the repository and push them up. There we go. So now our files are sitting up and live. We can actually go take a look at those if we jump over to our GitHub. We do a refresh. Oh, you'll notice there's no changes here, but that's because we're on the branch master 1. So let's just switch over to branch master or part 1, and you'll see our files are here. Now, Heroku is currently connected to master, which means it's not getting any of these files yet. We actually need to take these files and merge them into our master branch. So as I was saying last night, there are 4 steps to do that we must abide by at all times. The first step is we're going to make sure that this branch is currently up to date. So we're going to do a git pull on this branch to make sure we have a full up-to-date branch. The next step is I'm going to check out the master branch. So I do that by git check out master. Once I have it, I'm going to do a git pull to make sure that the master branch on my local machine is up to date. The reason why that is important is because when we do the merge, it's going to do it with your local repositories, not with your remote repositories. So that's important to understand. You need to make sure that your remote repositories are currently sitting local. So now that I've done that, I'm ready to do my merge. I'm going to do git merge part 1 and hit enter. And what it's going to do is it's going to take the files, it's going to assess the master repository, and it's going to make a comparison between the two, and it's going to replace any code or any file changes that are necessary into our new system. This is only local though still. Even though we've only merged locally. So in order to get this up to Git, we need to do step 3, which is, let's do a git push. That's going to push master up for us. And then step 4, let's just run over here real fast, do a refresh, and make sure that everything is good. And it looks like everything's okie dokie. So now that we've done that, I'm going to quickly jump over to Heroku and don't really pay that much attention to this. Just want to see the build process. Here we go. So you can see our application has actually started to build. So it detected that we were running a Node app because we have Node code. Created a runtime environment. It added some environment variables for us. It installed our binaries so that Node was installed and npm was installed. It actually ran our package.json file, so even though we didn't have the Node modules up, it automatically executed them for us. It did a build. It cached anything that was needed to cache. It pruned anything it needed to prune. We get a build succeeded. It compresses it. We're done at 18.4 megabytes, and it launches our application, and this is our address to our application. Now you don't need to remember that. You can actually, from in here, anywhere in here, doesn't matter where you are, you can click Open App. And it's going to navigate to the application, and very likely it is going to crash. And the reason why it's going to crash on us is because we actually have an error in our code. We made an assumption that we shouldn't have made. We made the assumption that we're on port 4000. However, Heroku actually assigns whatever port it's going to assign. So that assumption was wrong. We actually need to be able to tell it that it can either use port 4000 if it can't find a port, or it needs to use whatever port Heroku defines. So the way we do that is we need a couple of things. First, we're going to need a command line tool so that we can actually see what the problem is. And the easiest way to do that is to either just type in Heroku CLI tool in Google, which is probably the easiest and quickest way, or just navigate to the devcenter.heroku.com/articles/Heroku CLI. Once you're there, you're going to click download and install. If you have Brew, and you would know if you have Brew, use this command. If you don't, just do the download the installer if you're on Mac OS. If you're on Windows, you're going to use the 64-bit installer. And I think GoCool is the only person I know of that was using Linux. If you're using Linux, this is your command for Linux, but only if you're on Ubuntu. If you're using Fedora or some other distro, then you can't use this command. I would just recommend going through, just check on this and check the snaps, and then download Snap Package Manager. All right, so once that has installed, and you got to wait for it to install completely, there's 2 steps you need to do. 1, close your terminal entirely. Close it, exit it, make sure that it's all gone, right? Make sure it's entirely closed. That includes command prompt or whatever you're using. Reopen it. Navigate back to the branch you were on, or back to where your folder was. So I'm just pressing up to find where I actually typed this out. I'm going to hit enter, and it's going to navigate back into there. To make sure that I've installed Heroku, I'm going to type in Heroku-V. and it's going to say, yep, you've got Heroku version whatever. Your version may be different than mine because mine is a bit older. The next step I'm going to do is a Heroku login. So I'm going to do Heroku login and hit enter. It's going to say press any key to open up the browser to log in or Q to quit and exit. I'm going to hit enter. It's going to navigate to here and it's going to ask you to log into Heroku CLI. Now, if you're already logged in and you haven't logged out of Heroku, you'll just have to click login. Otherwise, you'll have to type in your login details. Click login. Says everything is good. Navigate back to your terminal and it should say you're logged in and what your login ID is. Okay? Now we're ready to check to see why our application failed. Now the cool thing is when you open your app, it's going to come up when it gets an application error and it's going to say type this into your terminal. So we're going to copy that, Heroku logs -- tail. We're going to paste it and we're not going to hit enter yet. We're going to hit space -A space -A stands for the application name. We can get the application from Heroku. It's right here at the top. So go ahead and copy that. Jump back over to your terminal, paste it in place, and then hit enter. What that's going to do is it's actually going to spit out the log files on our Heroku box. So our Heroku box is actually a physical, well, it's not physical, it's a virtual computer. It has Linux on it. It has now our Node installations and binaries on it. It has its own firewall and all that type of stuff. So because of that, we actually have a log file that we can look through. We can see where we actually started the build. We can see where it succeeded and everything was okay. If you scroll up further, you'll see when we did it the first time and it failed. That was when we only had the README file. So once it's passed, we can actually see it tried to start it using npm start, which is our go-to command. And you can kind of follow the trace. And then we can see, oh, we have an error right here. So it says it's listening on port 4000. Remember where we had that in our app file. But it says there's a web process failed to bind to port within 60 seconds of launch. The reason is because we assume the port is 4000, but it's not actually 4000. So we need to make a modification to our app.js file in order to fix this problem. So let's jump back over to Visual Studio Code. We're going to open up our app.js. And it's down here where we have this 4000 port where we have the issue. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to create a new variable. This is thanks to Noor because he did make the suggestion. Sorry, it wasn't Noor. I can't remember the fellow's name. I apologize, but credits to the guy who told me to do this. So we're going to do this because it does actually make more sense. This way we can actually state dynamically which port we're on. So the first piece we're going to need is to take a look at our environment variables. And we have a global object available to us in Node called process. And process is actually created by your environment. So locally it's created by your operating system in Node, obviously. And then on Heroku it's being created by Heroku. So process for us will be our local system. env is the environment we are currently in. So we're in development right now or test or whatever. And then the next piece is the environment variable we want to access. And it's port with all capital letters. And then we're going to use the one of the logical operators to help us out here. We're going to use OR 4000. What this basically says is if this is defined, exists, true, whatever, use its value. Otherwise, default to 4000. Okay? Now that we've done that, we've got our 4000, everything else, we're going to come over here. We're going to add some string interpolation here and just put in the word port. Make sure you've used backticks, because if you haven't used backticks, that won't work, right? We want string interpolation. Over here, we need to replace this 4000 with the word port, and now it will dynamically choose whichever one we're currently using. Now we've done all this on our master branch, which is totally fine. Let's jump back over to our terminal. We'll hit Control-C to exit out of the log file. I'm going to do a git status. It will say that we have a modification. I'm going to do a git add dot, git commit -m, added dynamic app, or sorry, dynamic port choosing. I'm going to do a git pull, always do a git pull, and then I'm going to do a git push, and that's going to push our changes. Once that's done, I'm going to quickly go back to Heroku logs, and you're going to actually watch as it changes its status from up to down, and then begins the build process. So it takes a few seconds because we just pushed the code up to master. There it goes. So state change from crashing to starting. Build started by us. It's starting our node process with npm start. Change from starting to up, and notice now this is us in our application. That's our console log, and we're stating that we're on port 25016, which is definitely not port 4000, right? So now I can go ahead and reopen my application. I can do that from the command line as well. I can just do Heroku open -a, and of course I can't remember the thing. There we go. And just with the app name, and hit enter. That will open up my browser and go to our application. And now you can see we have welcome to our very plain site. I think we have an about as well. Yeah, it's a cold, dark, rainy day in Pizzaville. And we're basically set. That's our whole Heroku deployment process. So now using that, you should be able to build your app. You're going to build a very simple server, the same thing that we did. You're going to add a couple of routes, and then you're going to deploy to Heroku, and you will be done. Now, in the lesson plan, it doesn't deploy this way. It actually uses a Heroku CLI for the whole process, and you are welcome to do that. That is not wrong. You can do it that way and use Heroku as your repository instead of GitHub, or you can do it this way using GitHub as your repository instead. Again, it's all purely a suggestion. If you want to use Azure, you are welcome to use Azure. If you want to use DreamHost, you can use DreamHost. That is completely up to you. You don't have to feel like you're married to any specific hosting technology. All right? Okay, cool. So I'm going to just back out of that, back out of here, back out of there. And before I close off GitHub, I'm actually going to create a new branch. I'm going to jump over to where it says branch master. I'm going to type in a new branch called part 2. And then I'm going to create that branch, and it's literally going to take my current master and clone it into a new branch. So now I have branch 2, and branch 2 looks exactly the same as master. So now I'm going to jump back over to my terminal, and I'm going to check out branch part 2. So I'm going to do git checkout part 02. Oh, sorry, I have to do a git fetch first. I tend to forget that for some reason. So there's my git fetch. Now I'll check out part 2. There we go. Now we're switched. Cool. Let's jump over to our app.js. I'm going to close off my git ignore. Everything in here is okay currently, and we're actually ready to start our lesson. I just want to put a stopping marker here. Cool. I have a marker there now. So currently the application that we built, very simple, has a couple of routes with a couple of controller actions already built in, and we're actually going to take a look at this today and explain what those are. And we're actually going to wind up moving these into their own file just to make things a little cleaner and a little easier. So the first thing I think is important is for us to explain what routing actually is. Routing is one of the most fundamental keys when working with a model view controller system or a component-based design pattern, right? So model view controller design pattern is basically where we separate our application into 3 distinct layers. Those distinct layers are the model layer, which is where we hold our data. So basically any of your tables that you could consider inside your Postgres database, or your collections if you're using Mongo, or documents, sorry, if you're using Mongo. Those things, no, collections is correct. Collections, sorry. If you're using those things, you can create models which are basically a representation of each of those tables or collections. The view is obviously what our client sees. It's what our user sees. Views can sometimes be built with HTML, but not always. Sometimes views are actually built with JSON or XML. Basically, it is just a display of your data. It's a consumable display of data. And then last but not least, we have the controller. The controller works as the communication layer between our model and our view. It basically facilitates data transfer from when it's being requested from the view to when it's being written to the model. And it handles all that interoperability. So simply put, routing is the practice of interpreting a user's request, so what they've typed into the URL, and transferring it to the correct location or controller action. So basically, we take a look at the path that they've requested. So the paths, for example, would be this is a path and this is a path, right? We take a look at those paths. So they might have typed in https example.com/about. We interpret that path as meaning they want to execute this particular controller action. Okay? So that's how we basically do it. We match the path to the controller action, and that's what the router is responsible for. So you can kind of consider it to be kind of like a phone operator. The operator takes a request from the person calling, connects them to the person they wish to reach, right? And they use the phone number as their path to figure out where they need to go. Routers are known as middleware, right? And you're going to hear that term a lot. Essentially, middleware is a communication layer that exists between two different functions. Routers are the same idea. They exist between two different functions. Basically, our user's client browser and then our server would be the other piece. And they're usually responsible, the routers are responsible for controlling traffic. So we're going to talk a little bit about resource routing. Resource routing is quite an in-depth topic. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to duplicate my lesson tab and bring it down here for us to see. There we go. And just maximize this a bit. Scroll down to where we are. All right, so the router itself, when we look at resource routing, it's basically a design pattern that utilizes a set of naming conventions to define what controller action we're going to call. So those design patterns, it's just a naming pattern that we use, that we provide to the user. The user uses that in their browser, in their address path, and when they type in their URL, we are able to take that and then interpret that and associate it to a controller action. Resource routing exists in every MVC, but it's more of a convention. It's a style. It's like a design style that we use. So generally the format is usually after the root slash, we list the resource that we want to access. So in this one, we're accessing resources, but this could be users, this could be blogs, right? Could be authors, could be whatever we want it to be. We interpret it, right? We create a route for it. So this is listening for the word resources specifically. So this would be listening for the users specifically. And then it sends it to the correct controller action. But it needs two pieces from the user. It needs to know what method they're using to actually access it and what their path is in order to connect it to the correct controller action. Because if you notice, we also have a resources down here, but it points to a different controller action. And the two pieces that define what controller action it's actually reaching is post and resources. So that is different than the top one. Okay? So these basically demonstrate the 7 controller actions that we'll wind up doing with all of our resources. Index represents basically the complete list. It's an index of all the resources we have for a resource. Show represents one resource, and we grab it by its identifier. In this scenario, we're using a number, but it might be a name, could be a slug, could be a bunch of different things. But basically, we use the identifier, the unique identifier, to get that one specific resource, and then we show it. These two operations have a view connected to them always. Either it's going to be a JSON object with a list of all our resources, or it'll be an HTML page with a table or something like that. The show one, same thing. It might just be a view, a nice pretty HTML view of our show. New is a little different. New will actually give us a form back. The form will be used to actually create a new resource. Don't confuse this with create though, because new is just the HTML view, right? It's the way for us to actually create the resource. When we actually get into React, we won't be using a new resource. We'll be using create directly, because we'll just literally send our parameters directly off to the post request. So we also have edit, which is obviously for editing an existing resource. It also takes an identifier in it so that it can return the correct resource. Then we have our post requests. So these posts are strictly actions that happen. There's no view associated with them. They will result usually in redirecting or giving us a success message. If it's a JSON that we're looking back for, we would return a success message or a fail message depending on what happened. So the first one, we're posting to resources, which will actually create the resource. Then we're posting to resources with an identifier, which will update our resource. Or we're posting to that specific resource and we're asking it to be deleted, which will cause the resource to be removed. Okay. The only ones we're going to really worry about today is actually the show. We're not going to worry about anything else. And that's because we don't really have any models. And because we don't have any models, we don't really have any resources. So what we're going to do is we're going to treat pages as a resource. So in order to better understand resource routing, we're going to treat common pages as a resource. The pages we'll create will be home, about, and contact. And our first step will be to create some route rules that will tell the router what actions to execute. We need to create some new folders and files as well, and then that will be our new file and folder structure. So the ones we're going to create are these ones that you see here in blue. So let's jump back over to our application, and let's get started doing that. All right, so the first folder we're going to need is called routes. So we're going to create a new folder, and we're going to call it routes. And inside routes, we're going to create a new file, and we're going to call it pages.js. And then we're going to create a routes file at the root of our application, and we're going to call it routes.js. So basically the way this is going to work is we're going to register the routes with our app, and it's just going to be a collection of all the router files that we're going to have, and then we're going to keep those each individual resource router files underneath this routes directory. The convenience of that is that we can easily modularize where our routes are taking up, and we don't wind up with a routes page that's 200 lines long with every single resource route that we have, because it just gets a little bit excessive. It's much easier to keep them in their own separate little files. So our next step is to actually move our current routes from the app.js over to their new appropriate folder or file. So we're actually going to wind up moving them into, I believe we're going to move them into pages.js. Yeah, that's exactly where we're moving them to. So we're going to move them into pages.js. So let's open up pages.js. The first line we're going to do is actually our library that we need to require. So we're going to require the express router, equals require express. And we only want the router function, so I'm just going to pull the router function directly. That's basically going to execute the router function. Notice that we're using the invoke operator here. Yeah. So that's going to execute the router function and then store its value into router for us. The next piece is we just want to copy and paste in our app.js routes. So jump back over to app.js, take these two blocks, so the app.get and the app.get.about, cut them right out, go ahead and save that file, jump over to pages and paste them in place. And then last but not least, we need to actually export the contents of this file. So basically anything we have currently registered with router, we're going to export back, and then we can pick that up in the next file. So we're going to do module.exports equals router. I need to change these two app words. I'm going to just double click them and hold command down, or you can hold control down to select them individually. And we're going to change them to the word router. So basically what happens is this creates a router object, and we register 2 new routes to the router object, and then we're exporting it out. It is still not a part of our application because this file is not currently being required by anybody. We need it to be required. And that's actually our next step. We're going to require it inside of our routes.js. So the syntax that you see here for module exports, it's a little new. Module is a global object, just like process, that Node creates when it runs. The module object contains tons of properties and functions that you can use to help with your application, but one of those is exports. Exports basically creates a way to bind our current logic on our page and pass it to the requiring file. So when a file requires this, it's not getting all of this, it gets literally just this. When it requires, it gets whatever this is actually exporting out. So we're going to export our router object. But notice our router object has new functionality that it didn't before. Okay? So we need to go over to our routes.js. So that's in our root folder. So we're going to jump over to routes.js. First piece we're going to need to do, we're actually going to create a new app inside this file. There is an easier way to do this, but I feel like this makes the most amount of sense. So we're going to require express, just like we did in our app.js file. We're going to create an app, just the same as we would before. The only difference is we're not going to set this app to listen on any ports. Next, we're going to import our page routes. So we'll create a page routes variable, and we'll require our file. And there we go. Actually, I think it's just called pages. It's not page routes. There we go. So now what will happen is this router object will now be stored inside here. The next step is we actually need to register the routes with our current application. So we're going to register our page routes, and we do that by doing app.use/page routes. And basically what this means is it's just registering the slash with whatever routes it pulls back from the pages. We can actually do /blog, /whatever we want, and then whatever routes will happen in here would be /blog//blog/about. Which is kind of cool. It makes things a little handy for us to use. We'll see more of that next week. And then we just want to export these changes that we've made to app. And there we go. And now all we need to do is in app.js, we need to actually require this file so that we get those changes and we can apply them to our application. So let's jump back over to app.js. And right here where we were actually working before, we're going to create our routes. Const routes is equal to require the routes.js file, right? And I'll just write .js just so you don't confuse it with the folder called JS or routes. And then we're going to register it, use/routes. So the reason why we're doing this registration, and I didn't explain this last night, is anytime we're using a middleware, we actually need to tell the application to use that middleware. And we do that by using the keyword use. Now, right now we're doing this with routes, but you can actually use as well with things like functions that you've created and a whole bunch of other aspects. But every time you do that, every time you're creating a new middleware, you need to tell your app to actually use that middleware and register it with it. That's about the extent of my knowledge of what use actually does. So I apologize if that's not a good enough explanation. So currently we're working on this particular use case. I want to see one resource record. Well, I only want to see one page, right? So I want to see the home or the about or the contact page. So the user is going to make a request. You can pretend this says, instead of pages, this would be about, right? Or home or contact, right? They're going to actually make that request through the URL. That's going to hit our router, right? So our router is going to say, okay, cool. Our routes are currently stored in routes. It's going to jump over here. It's going to say, I don't really know what routes you're looking at. Let's check in page routes. And then page routes is going to go, cool, here's /. Execute this operation for the user. So it's going to go there. You can think of that as our controller action that we're listing here. That's going to reach out possibly to a database, but we're not using a database for this particular thing. So it's just going to render a view. We're not rendering a view. We're just sending back a message. So that would be this step here. So why don't we actually recreate this so that it's a little closer to what that operation is by using proper controllers and proper views. And in order to do that, we need to modify our application a little bit. And we're going to do that by using two new folders, controllers, and views. Sorry, I just realized you didn't even actually see what I was looking at. So let me jump back down to it. Here it is right here. This is what I'm looking at. This is the user's request. This is the interpretation our routing system is taking. This is the controller action that gets fired off. And then this is the view that winds up getting rendered. And we're going to build this right now. Cool. So step one, we're going to build out a controller. So new folder, controllers. And in our controllers folder, we're going to create a new file. And it's going to be called pagescontroller.js. Watch your spelling, because 90% of the time Students tell me that their application doesn't work, it's due to their spelling or a syntax error. We're also going to create a new folder and call it views at the root level. This does not go in controllers, this is at the root level of our application. We're going to create a new file, we're going to create a new folder in there called pages. And you know what, while we're at it, why don't we create 2 more new folders. We're going to create a folder called layouts, and we're going to create a new folder called partials. And I'll explain more about those later on. Under the pages, we're going to create a new file called home.pug. We're going to create a second new file called about.pug, and a third new file called contact.pug. And there we go. So in total, you should have a controllers folder with pages controller in it. You should have a views folder with a pages folder inside with about, contact, and home.pug in it. You should also have a layouts folder and a partials folder. In the layouts folder, we're going to create a new file called main.pug. And in the partials folder, we're going to create a new file called nav.pug. And there we go. We have everything we basically need to create our view operations. The first file I'm going to work with will be in pages controller. I'm actually going to create my page controller operation, the action that I need to create. And that action is going to be our show method. And it's very easy to do this. There really isn't too much difficulty here. It's simply exports.show. So exports is the same as module.exports. It's actually going to export the function that we're about to create, and we're going to assign that function to the property show. So we can write it anonymously like so, with request and res, and there we go. That works totally fine. Or we can take advantage of arrow functions, which I prefer over the anonymous function. And there we go. So these 2 arguments that are going to get passed in when this route executes, it's going to pass in 2 objects. One will be the request object, which will contain all the parameters the user has defined when they made the request. And then the other object will be the response object, which is what we use to be able to send back a response to the user. So the first piece I need is to actually take a look at their path, the request path. The path will tell me what path they actually typed into their browser, and then I can execute logic based on that. So I only really care about 3 different paths in this particular pages controller. One is the home path, the other is the about, and the other is the contact. However, the home path is going to be directed towards our root of our file. So you can think of it as going to here. Right to there, right? Instead of about. Otherwise, or I want it to go to HTTPS localhost 4000/about or /contact. Okay, so in order to be able to do all 3 of those, we need to be able to evaluate the path. So I'm going to do const path equals, I'm going to write a ternary statement. I'm going to check the path property that gets passed on the request object. I'm going to check to see if it's equal to /. If it's equal to just the /, then I know that they're trying to access the home directory. Otherwise, I'm just going to return the request path, which means they'd be accessing about or contact. Now I'm ready to render the view. And the way I do that is I just do res, which is my response object, render, which is a method that's on the response object, and then I give it the response that I want. So I'm going to do pages, and I'm using string interpolation, with a $sign and a set of curly braces, and the path. What that's going to produce will be views / pages / about, for example, or home or whatever. That's what this will resolve to. Now you may be asking, where the heck does views come from? Because views is definitely not a part of this. Views is actually going to be delivered by our application, and we actually need to tell our app that that's what we want to do. So we're going to have to set two new pieces under our app.js. The first piece, so we're going to create a new folder thing here calling view configuration. And we're going to need to set two configuration options underneath our app. So we're going to do app.set. The first one is views. This tells it where the views folder will be. And we're going to say it's under path.join underscore underscore. There's two underscores there, so don't forget that. dir name. And we're looking for the views folder in the root. I'm using this path object here that I don't have yet. We need to actually import the path object. So why don't we do that now? We're just going to, just above here, do const path equals require path, and then that will import the path object for us. Path just makes it a little easier to create absolute URLs because dir name will actually be the correct directory for our root of our app. Now we're going to do app.set, set the view engine. And we're going to use a templating engine known as Pug. Pug is a really cool template engine. Basically, it allows us to write HTML super quick. We could use Pug, JSX, EJS. There's a whole bunch of different ones that you can actually use. Hamel, Mustache, Handlebar. There's a whole bunch of them. But Pug, I find, is pretty easy to use. Plus, it's the closest thing to a lot of the type of languages you're going to see out there, like Hamel. It's a tab-delimited templating language. It means it uses tabs to be able to define what is nested within another block. So we're going to use that because it will give you exposure to tabs as well, tab delimitation. The only problem is we're asking it to use Pug, but we can't currently use Pug because we don't have it installed. So we actually need to install Pug. So this will be the second time we've actually installed a module. So let's go through that process. So it's npm install pug, like that, and hit enter. And then that's going to go ahead and install the pug module for us. And the cool thing is Express already has required it if it exists. So we don't need to actually require it in the app. We just need to tell it to use it. The next thing I want to install, just to stop the whole hassle of doing npm start all the time, I'm going to use a module called NodeMod, or NoDaemon. NoDaemon actually allows us to make changes to our application and not have us have to restart our application every single time. Now, some people have difficulty installing NodeMod because we're going to install it at the global level. And you need to make sure that you have permissions to do that. So make sure that you've either opened your command prompt or PowerShell using administrator privileges. You can try it, and if it works, it works. But if it doesn't, try opening your thing as an administrator. If you're in Mac, you may need to sudo install. So it would be sudo npm install nodemon-g. If you have to do that, then you'll have to enter in your password, just the password you use to enter into your computer, and then that will install NodeMod for you globally. And that's the way we want to install NodeMod. We want to install it at the global level. So I'm just going to do npm install NodeMod because I already have administrator privileges. I'm going to hit enter. It's going to go through the process of installing NodeMod, which is actually a fairly large package. Once it's done, it's going to say that it's installed, and we will know because we'll be able to do NodeMod-v. If you can do NodeMod-v, it will say 1.19.0. If it doesn't, try closing your command prompt, reopening your command prompt, and try NodeMod-v again just to see whether or not it was a path issue. Okay? Once that's happened, we can actually run NodeMod. Currently says it's listening on port 4000. So let's jump over to Google Chrome. We'll go to localhost 4000 and make sure our application is still working, and it looks like everything is still fine. I can still go to there, I can still go to about, and all of that piece still works. Cool. But I'm not getting any view files or anything like that because we still don't have everything absolutely connected up. It will actually render pug files for us, but we need to connect all these pieces, which currently are not connected. So we have our pages controller that we created. In here, our pages controller uses our export show, which is the property that we're going to assign this function to. I'm just going to put a semicolon there because we should have one there to close it. It's not absolutely necessary, but it does look a little better. We explored what request and response objects are, and we created the request and response objects down here. So we used the request object here, and we did a render on the response object there. Now the pages controller needs to be assigned to our actual router. We need to attach it so that it can use that as a way to direct traffic, right? Because the whole idea of the router is to observe the path, analyze it, and then call the appropriate controller action based on that. So I'm going to open up my routes, go to my pages route, and I'm going to actually go ahead and delete these two routes because we don't need them anymore. And I'm going to create two comments. One's routes, one is controllers. Under the controllers, I'm going to create a new variable called pages controller with a capital P and a capital C. I'm going to make it equal to require ... controllers / pages controller, the name of our file, right? So that's going to import our pages controller into here, and now I'm going to assign our routes to it. So the first route I'm going to create using router.get, just like we did before. I'm going to tell it the route I want, but instead of creating an anonymous function in here, I'm just going to assign it the pages controller show function definition. So literally what will happen is when the user requests the home route, it's going to immediately execute this function, which we'll call this. It will pass the request and the response object in. We'll evaluate the path, and we'll render whatever page it is they're requesting. That will take a look underneath the pages, because that's the directory we're looking at, and we'll render whatever particular view it is. Nice and simple, very easy. I'm going to duplicate this 2 more times. I'm going to write about and contact. The coolest thing about this is it creates a very big convenience for us. Because we only have one action under our pages controller, in order to create new pages, all we need to do is create a new route and a new view. That's it. We can create 150 pages if we want to. And we just do the page and the route. That's all we need. If you wanted to, you could isolate this particular current version of our application as a simple static app deliverer. So you could deliver a static web page if you wanted to. You could use it for your portfolio or something like that. And that would totally work. And it's very easy to do that. All right, cool. So I've got my pages in. I've got my routes in. I have my pages controller all set up. I'm going to just jump over to our iTerm. It's not freaking out. Looks like it's happy. So let's just re-render this. Yep, there's nothing here. And the reason why there's nothing here is because we don't have any logic in our view. So let's go ahead and modify our pug file. So I'm going to jump over to home.pug, and just for convenience sake, just because it's come on, I'm trying to copy. There we go. Just because I am being super lazy, I'm just going to copy and paste the logic in here and then explain it. Wow, that was the worst copy ever. Yeah, I'm not doing that. That was terrible. All right, I'll explain it as I type it. So the first thing we're going to need is HTML to basically state that it's an HTML page. And then we're going to type in head, which is going to be the head section, and we're going to need a body section. Notice that I'm not typing in closing tags. There's no braces on either end. It's literally just the tag itself, the HTML tag's name. So I'm using the HTML tag HTML. I'm using the head tag and the body tag. This tabbing is very important, and the most important thing I can tell you about the tabbing is it doesn't care how much distance there is from here to here, as long as the distance is consistent throughout your application, right? So don't use 2 here and 4 here. Make sure you keep it the same distance. If you just use the tab button, it makes life a lot simpler. So here's title, my awesome title. Cool. Under body, I'm going to create an H1. And I want to give my H1 an ID, and that's very simple. I just write the hashtag and the ID name that I want to do. Then I can write the name of the title. So best site ever. I'm going to create a p tag, and I want to give my p tag a class, so I'm going to call it intro text. And somebody asked how you actually create a second class. It's just second class. You just keep adding dots on, and it will just keep creating classes. If you want to add some attributes to it, like a data attribute, or say you're creating an input and you wanted to do like a name attribute, you simply just add a set of brackets, reference the attribute's key, and then give it a value. And then I'm ready to type out what my actual line is. So it was a rainy day in Pizzaville. I'm going to save that. Now I'm just going to jump over to make sure it works. Refresh, and I've got best site ever. It was a rainy day in Pizzaville. Now just to show you this is actually creating HTML, I'm going to view the page source, and you can see here that's exactly what it's doing. I have an HTML tag, I have a head tag, I have a title tag, right? My awesome title, there's my head, my body, my H1 with an ID of header, best site ever. There's my P tag, it created a class with intro text and my second class in it. I have a data attribute, and the data attribute has my value in it, and then I have it was a rainy day in Pizzaville. Notice it's auto-created the end tags for me, and I have perfectly formatted HTML. It's not pretty, because it's all condensed, but it's good enough for what we're doing. So you can understand how Pug and templating engines make life a lot simpler. We can actually do a lot of really cool things with the templating engines, like iterations and stuff like that. However, one drawback here currently is that we have to type this into every single Pug file, and I don't want to do that because I find that annoying. Every Pug file is going to have these pieces in it, and obviously when I start including things like external libraries like Bootstrap and Font Awesome, I want to be able to add them once. I don't want to have to add them 150 times. So the easiest way to make that doable is by using something called layouts. So that's why I got you to create this layouts file here. We're going to take this logic here and we're going to exit. So Command X to cut it. I'm going to dump over to main Pug and I'm going to paste it in. Whoops. Paste it in. There we go. Which is totally fine. I'm going to modify it a little bit though. I want to have the doc type HTML up here, right? And I want to make this a properly formatted document, so I'm going to also have the language tag English in there as well. Right now I still have my awesome title. Now I want to make sure that my home Pug's content shows up in this layout, and the way I do that is by using the Pug utility function called block. Block allows you to define a location where information will be plugged in. So I'm going to do block, and then I just have to give it a name, and I can literally give it any name I want, but I'm going to call it content just to make my life nice and simple. And then all I have to do in the home page is the same thing. I have to extend the layout and then add in the block. So let's add in the block first. So this is block content. It has to be named the same. And I'm just going to shift tab these back so that the distance is the same. And then I need one more piece. I have to actually extend the layout. So I'm just going to do extends /layouts /main.pug. And then that's all the data I need in order to include the layout and have this content show up right here. So now if I refresh, everything looks the same. But if I right click and choose to view the page source, you can see I have my doc type and everything, but my logic from the H1 tag on is nicely nested inside the body tag. Last little bit is, I didn't teach this last night, I was kind of hoping to, but I want partials, and the reason why I want partials is because it makes it a lot easier to work with things like navigation that are the same across all of our application. So partials are basically a way for us to reduce redundant views. We use them to populate small repetitious pieces of code. So maybe we have like a foundational structure that we want to use and we want to use it in 100 different places. We can actually create a partial of that and then include it wherever we want it to go. So we could code this. We're going to create a navigation. We could code it directly inside this layout file. That's totally fine. but I'd rather use a partial because then we can actually use logic to flip that navigation out for a different navigation when the user's logged in or something like that. All right. So in order to do that, we're going to create a partial. So under the partials folder, you have your nav.pug, which is totally cool. Go ahead and open that up. In there, we're just going to type out this ul li a. We're going to give it a href tag. There we go. And we're going to point that at home. Next, I'm just going to highlight these two and hit Command-Shift-D. It might be Control-Shift-D or Alt and right or something. There's different ways to do it depending on your IDE. I'm going to navigate to About and to Contact. And save that. Now, I'm not using the block function or extends in here, and I don't need to. All I need to do is pull this into where I want it to actually show up. So in my main pug, just above my block content, I'm going to hit enter, and I want my navigation to show up here. And all I need to do in order to do that is just include it. So I'm going to do include ... partials / nav.pug. And then that will actually include this file inside here. And we can go see that. Let's just jump over to Chrome. Hit refresh, and there's my links. Yay! So we've got partials, we've got layouts, we're off to the races. So the next step is this title. Right now it says my awesome title, but I want to be able to change it to whatever title I want. Now usually we would deliver this from the controller and just deliver it as a parameter known as a local. A local is basically a variable that we could use. However, we're going to do this in a very simple way so that we can define this in the actual view file. That block thing that we were using before is actually super handy. You can encapsulate whatever you want inside the block. It doesn't care. So we're going to add another block because I want to be able to use a title tag here, like a title variable here, but we need to be able to define that. So I'm going to do block globals up here. And then I just have to define a globals object inside my views and type in my variables in there, and then they become accessible to me. So this title, we're going to actually spit out a variable, and the way we do that, to let it know that we want to interpret JavaScript, we do equals. Equals basically says take whatever JavaScript I'm going to put on the right, and whatever return value it gives, spit it out as text, right? So basically call to string on it. I'm going to write a ternary. I'm going to do title. So the variable name will be called title. I can call it whatever I want, but I'm going to call it title. If title exists, then give back the title. Otherwise, say I do not have a title yet. I am a bad, horrible person. I should be very ashamed. There we go. And I'm going to save that. Now, because none of this is being used, if I jump back over to Google Chrome, I can't talk, and refresh, you'll see I do not have a title yet. I am a bad, horrible person. I should be very ashamed. Which, I mean, why not, right? Okay, cool. So now I'm going to jump back over to my IDE. I'm also going to plug in my laptop before it dies and I lose this video, because that would be very unfortunate and quite aggravating. Of course, I have no idea what the heck I did with my plug. Oh, here it is. I found it. All good. Okay, cool. Yay, it's charging. Okay, so now that I have the block globals, and because I'm already extending this layout in the home page, I don't need to do anything else. I just need to define what I'm going to put in there. So I'm going to do a couple of lines, block globals. And now I can define some variables in here. In order to define, in order to execute JavaScript logic but not spit it out as text, I use a dash. I'm going to create a variable called title. Actually, I'm going to create a constant called title. Equals my super awesome blogging platform. Or whatever you want to call it. Totally up to you. The other cool thing is I could just use my title here. I don't need to use this, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to do equals title. There we go. And now if I jump back and hit refresh, my super awesome blogging platform, and my title sys, my super awesome blogging platform. Sweet. So now for the other files, we're going to basically do the same thing. I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to jump to about. I'm going to paste it there. And I'm going to write about my super awesome blogging platform and save it. And then I'm going to jump over to contact. Same thing. But I'm going to write contact my super awesome blogging platform. And now I'm ready to go check this out. I'm just going to jump over back to my browser. And I'm going to click on my about link, about my super awesome blogging platform, and my contact link, contact my super awesome blogging platform. And then I'm going to navigate back home. And then I'm going to check and see if we have anything else, and we don't. Okay, so this is obviously extremely simplistic. We haven't done much with the views. Now, I was going to actually give you 3 new views for next week to use. However, I'm going to leave that open to you because, I mean, why not? Make this custom. Make it your thing, right? So I want you to create your own home, your own about, and your own contact page. I'll make it a lab, and you'll get marks for it. But I'll post a thing for that. We'll make it lab 2. That way it's a little simpler for you. All right, cool. We're also going to do next week, we're going to add CSS and JavaScript, and we're going to learn a little bit about adding in Mongo and playing around with Mongo. I hope you guys have a great weekend, and I will see you on Monday. Cheers.